Blood pooled warm against my cheek, metallic on my tongue, sharp enough to sting the back of my throat. The door frame groaned behind me, splinters biting into my palm as I pushed myself up. Heavy boots thudded down the hallway, fading but leaving the air thick with the sour mix of sweat and whiskey. In the doorway, Claire leaned against the frame, arms folded like she was watching a rehearsal instead of a beating. She didn't kneel, she didn't call for help. Her voice came flat, almost rehearsed. You should have signed. Each breath was a razor pulled through my ribs. Above me, the folded flag rattled in its glass case, the silver ribbon trembling before it snapped loose and fell to the floor. I forced my neck straight, counted the pain, cataloged the damage. Reflexes, vision, airway. All the steps drilled into me in combat zones. Only this time, the enemy wasn't a stranger on foreign soil. It was family in my living room. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving a jagged gap where the lock had been. A cold draft slid across the broken wood, carrying the night's dust into my lungs. I picked up my phone, my fingers trembling not just from the injury, but from the choice I knew I was about to make. Because battles don't always begin overseas. Sometimes they start at your own front door, with the people who share your blood. My name is Captain Emily Carter, 34 years old, U.S. Army Medical Corps. I've spent the last decade stitching men back together in tents that shook under rocket fire, holding arteries closed with bare fingers while helicopters thundered overhead. Out there, chaos was a given, but my voice always stayed even, my hands steady. Discipline was survival, and I wore it like armor. Back home, my life was quieter, on paper at least. A modest apartment just off base. Walls lined with shadow boxes, medals, citations, the flag folded from my father's service. The smell of antiseptic still clung to my scrubs most nights when I dropped them by the washing machine. I told myself this was stability, the version of life I'd earned after years in desert dust. Family was supposed to be part of that stability. Claire, my younger sister, wasn't a soldier, but she was my anchor in a different way. The one person who'd known me before the rank, before the deployments. Or so I believed. When she brought Mason home, a former Marine, all smiles and polished manners, I wanted to trust her choice. I wanted to believe she'd found someone steady where I couldn't be. But sometimes the air in a room tells the truth before anyone speaks. I'd notice his hand on her elbow a second too long, the way her laugh would falter under his glance. Small things, easy to dismiss. Still, I logged them the way I did everything else. Quiet observations tucked into the corners of memory. Because in my line of work, ignoring early signs is how you lose patience. Or, in this case, how you lose family. And though I didn't know it then, the day would come when those small signs would grow teeth and sink them into my life. Claire and I grew up in a house where uniforms weren't optional, they were oxygen. Our father wore his army service like a second skin. Our mother, a nurse, followed him from base to base. The hallways smelled of boot polish and starch. Loyalty wasn't just expected, it was commanded. I absorbed it, shaped myself around it. Claire, she wore it like a borrowed coat, something she shrugged off when it grew too heavy. By the time I deployed for my first tour, Claire had dropped out of college. Just temporary, she told me, twirling a strand of hair like it was all part of a plan. But temporary stretched into years of odd jobs, bartending, car sales, a boutique that folded before the ink dried on its business cards. I sent postcards from desert outposts. She sent photos from music festivals, grinning under neon lights. Different lives, same blood. I convinced myself that was enough. Then came Mason. He was charming at first, the kind of man who filled a room with easy smiles. A Marine discharged after a knee injury. At the barbecue where we first met, I noticed the way he corrected Claire mid-sentence, smoothing her words like he was editing a script. I'd seen that before in combat zones. Control rarely starts with shouting. It starts with shaping. Their wedding was a spectacle Austin could have printed on postcards. Crystal centerpieces, a live band, champagne that tasted like paychecks. I smiled for pictures, But inside, I kept calculating. Mason's landscaping business barely broke even. Claire wasn't working. Their bank accounts couldn't carry a wedding like that. When the first calls for money came, small loans, just until the next contract clears, I told myself it was family. That's what you do, right? You say yes. But every yes chipped something away. A crack in the armor I'd worn since Fort Bragg. Then came the night they walked into my apartment dressed like a magazine spread. Claire in silk, Mason in a suit, carrying wine that cost more than my rent. They laid out a glossy brochure on my coffee table. 100 acres in Texas, rolling pastures, a barn framed in golden sunlight. "It's our future," Claire whispered, eyes shining like a child's. Mason leaned in, his voice low and deliberate. "All we need is your signature on the loan." It was $1.2 million, twice my annual base pay, more debt than I'd ever let touch my name. I didn't even need to read the fine print to know what it meant. Disaster disguised as a dream. I told them I'd think about it. That single hesitation bought me 24 hours, long enough for the storm to start gathering, long enough for Mason to decide that my no was the ultimate betrayal. And betrayal in his world had only one answer. When I finally said the word no, the air in my living room shifted like a pressure drop before a storm. Claire's smile faltered, her wineglass trembling in her hand. Mason's, however, sharpened into something colder. He didn't argue, he didn't raise his voice. He just set his glass down carefully, the base ringing against the wood like a quiet ultimatum. From that moment on, the siege began. The texts came first, long rants about family loyalty, about what I supposedly owed them. Mason painted himself as the wronged veteran, the man abandoned by his own blood. Then came Claire's messages, softer but no less cutting. Snapshots of us as kids in fatigues, captions like, "Guess we're not teammates anymore." Every ping of my phone became another reminder that love, in their hands, had been weaponized into leverage. It didn't stop at messages. One night on base, 2 MPs intercepted Mason waving the same glossy ranch brochure like it was proof of betrayal. His voice boomed down the corridor. "She's family. She can't hide behind a uniform." I didn't confront him. I simply filed the incident, letting procedure grind forward. But the stares from my colleagues lingered, whispers brushing the back of my neck like cold wind. Then Claire called. Her voice was calm, almost rehearsed, stripped of emotion. "Mason's upset. He wants to talk to you." No apology, no concern, just a warning disguised as a statement. 15 minutes later, the pounding started. Not a knock, an assault on my door, each hit rattling the hinges, Mason's voice carrying through the wood. "Open the damn door, Emily." I had my phone in hand, thumb hovering over the number for the MPs, but hesitation, just a single beat of loyalty, of hope, cost me everything. The frame splintered under his shoulder, the lock exploding like a gunshot. The whiskey on his breath hit me before his fists did. And through the blur of pain, I saw Claire, arms crossed, weight on one hip, her words a blade sharper than his fists. "You should have signed." The MPs didn't need explanations when I staggered into the gate that night, uniforms streaked with blood. They logged Mason's name before I even finished the intake. By morning, CID had taken over. Special Agent Harris introduced himself with clipped precision. No wasted words, just a notepad and eyes that missed nothing. "We're treating this as both a federal assault and a military jurisdiction matter," he said. Finally, the storm Mason thought he controlled was no longer just mine to weather. But I knew better than to trust momentum alone. In combat, you don't wait for the enemy to retreat, you secure the field. So I built my case piece by piece, like prepping for surgery. Evidence became my scalpel. First came the logs, screenshots of Mason's threats, photos of the black truck with timestamps, my printed reports to Sergeant Rodriguez, then security footage, grainy hallway video of Mason forcing my door, shoulders driving into wood until it splintered. Each frame was another stitch holding my story together. Harris found the gem I hadn't expected, an old police report from Oklahoma. A former girlfriend of Mason's had accused him of assault. Charges dropped, the trail buried. But now it resurfaced, like shrapnel under scar tissue. Meanwhile, I called in my own reinforcements. Captain Reeves, a JAG attorney with a surgeon's precision for dismantling weak defenses. Together, we built the strategy. Federal court for the assault charge, military review board for conduct on a federal installation. 2 fronts, no escape routes. Still, I kept my own counsel because I knew Mason's type. He'd lean into the uniform, the medals pinned neatly to his chest. He'd play the wounded veteran, the man who lost control, just once. Sympathy was his weapon, and Claire, God help her, might still be his shield. So I prepared for that too. I reached out to the Warrior Sisters, a network of women in uniform who knew what it meant to survive betrayal behind closed doors. Their stories became my map, their scars my compass. With them, I wasn't just one officer seeking justice. I was part of a formation, tight, unbreakable. I rehearsed every answer for the stand, kept my voice calm, practiced my breathing until even the memory of Mason's fists couldn't shake it. I would not fight him in the dark anymore. This battle would be waged under fluorescent lights in full view of the law, where evidence, not intimidation, held the power. And somewhere in that quiet resolve, I realized Mason thought he had forced me into a corner. But corners can also be strongholds, if you know how to turn and face the enemy. The courthouse smelled of old wood and cold air conditioning, a place designed to strip emotion down to transcripts and exhibits. Mason walked in dressed like a recruitment poster, pressed suit, medals pinned neatly to his lapel, hair trimmed to perfection. He didn't look like the man who had slammed his fists into my face. He looked like the wounded veteran he wanted the jury to believe in. His eyes dropped, his voice soft. Regret draped over him like a well-tailored coat. I didn't flinch. I'd seen soldiers perform under fire, but this was just theater, and I had the script. Captain Reeves led with the footage. Grainy hallway video, Mason's shoulder hammering the doorframe, wood splintering before he stormed inside. A murmur rippled across the room as the timestamp flickered on screen. My injuries followed. X-rays of a fractured zygomatic bone, photos of bruises running purple and green across my jaw and shoulder. The evidence didn't scream. It didn't need to. It spoke in the cold language of fact. Mason's attorney tried to spin it. A momentary lapse, a misunderstanding, a veteran's temper slipping under stress. I kept my face unreadable, my breathing steady, every answer clipped, clear, like the field reports I'd filed in combat. Yes, that is my log of messages. Yes, that is Mason's truck photographed outside my apartment. The jury watched, and with each response, I felt the ground tilting. But the part I couldn't prepare for was Claire. She sat stiff in the gallery, eyes forward, hands twisted in her lap. She hadn't spoken to me since that night. Every instinct told me she would protect him. Her silence, her complicity had already screamed louder than words. When her name was called, she walked to the stand, heels clicking against the tile like drum beats. My pulse quickened, but my expression stayed still. "Tell us what happened the night of March 14th, the prosecutor asked. Claire's voice trembled at first, then steadied. She spoke of the pounding at my door, of Mason's shoulder breaking it open, of the first blow landing across my face. She described standing there, arms folded, silent, and how Mason hissed, "Next time, you'll think twice." Each sentence left Mason's mask cracking. The jury's eyes shifted. His polished image couldn't cover the violence Claire now laid bare. That was the moment, the keystone in the arch, the part of the plan no one but Claire could deliver. And for the first time since this war began, I watched Mason's smile vanish. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that presses on your skin, that makes every breath sound like a drumbeat. Rain lashed against the tall windows, steady, relentless, as if the world itself were listening. Mason sat at the defense table, shoulders squared, jaw tight, metal still gleaming on his lapel as though cloth and metal could rewrite the truth. The judge's voice cut through the stillness. In the matter of United States v. Mason Carter, each word landed like a hammer against stone. I kept my eyes fixed forward, but out of the corner of my vision, I saw Mason lean forward, hands clasped, playing the part of the repentant man. But then came the evidence one final time. The jury requested the video replay. The screen flickered to life, the door buckling under his shoulder, the wood splintering, his body charging into the frame. A woman in the front row gasped. No amount of polish, no medals, no rehearsed remorse could compete with the truth captured in that footage. The verdict was read. Guilty on all counts. For a long moment, the room held its breath. Mason turned to Claire, eyes wide, searching for the shield she had always been. But Claire didn't move. Her gaze stayed locked on the floor, fingers twisted together, as if she was finally unspooling the years he'd wrapped around her. The judge's sentence followed, steady and final. 6 years in federal prison, followed by a lifetime restraining order. No fanfare, no drama, just the law, plain and immovable. Mason's face drained of color. His composure cracked, lips pressed thin, hands tightening around the table's edge. For the first time, I saw not a Marine, not a husband, not even a man with power, but a caged predator realizing the walls had closed in. And in that silence, I stood a little straighter. I didn't smile, I didn't gloat. I simply breathed in, steady and full, as if reclaiming space he had tried to strip from me. The storm had broken, and this time, it wasn't me who stood bleeding in the wreckage. The days after the sentencing were strangely quiet. No pounding at my door, no black truck idling under the street lamp, just silence. A silence I hadn't realized I'd been craving until it wrapped itself around me like a shield. My cheek healed, the swelling fading into memory. My shoulder regained its range of motion with each steady repetition in physical therapy. The body keeps its score, but it also learns to mend. Claire filed for divorce soon after. It was quiet, without spectacle. One morning, she left me a voicemail, her voice fragile but resolute. I'm out. Weeks later, we sat across from each other at a coffee shop, the air heavy with words we couldn't yet say. Her eyes were ringed with exhaustion, but behind them, I saw a flicker of the sister I used to know. The one who braided my hair in Dad's Jeep, the one who stood beside me in mismatched fatigues. Forgiveness wasn't instant, it wasn't simple, but survival had given us a second chance at a different kind of sisterhood. I requested a transfer into a training role, teaching young medics how to keep their heads in chaos. My lectures didn't just cover trauma care, they carried a message. Boundaries are survival. Whether in a war zone or your own living room, the lines you draw can save your life. Months later, I stood at a podium at a military conference on domestic violence and financial exploitation. The room was filled with uniforms, some crisp and new, others faded from decades of service. My name was printed neatly on the program, beneath the words, guest speaker. I told my story without embellishment, because truth didn't need to be decorated. Faces nodded. Some eyes looked away. They understood. Claire came the following year. She sat quietly in the back, listening, hands folded in her lap. We didn't exchange many words afterward, just a brief hug, steady, unspoken. Sometimes reconciliation isn't loud. Sometimes it's simply the absence of harm. If there's one thing I've carried from all of this, it's that blood doesn't guarantee safety, and loyalty isn't something you surrender at gunpoint or under a family name. The Army taught me discipline. Mason taught me the cost of misplaced loyalty. Between them, I learned a final truth. My life, my safety, my honor are non-negotiable. The battlefield doesn't always lie overseas. Sometimes it waits in your own home, disguised as family. And when you win that battle, not with rage but with resolve, you walk away carrying a kind of honor no one can strip from you.